The Marriage Stone by Josephine Darcy. Chapter 47. Settle. When Severus walked into the infirmary alongside Albus and Minerva, he saw Charlie Weasley settling the still unconscious Draco Malfoy onto one of the waiting beds. As they watched, the red-haired man turned Draco partially over and checked the back of his neck to see if the chain holding the dragon gold had cut into his flesh when he tried frantically to pull it off. While the skin was red, it was unbroken. Charlie ran a careful finger under the chain as if to soothe the flesh. That action more than anything settled Severus's unease. While Draco was not his favorite person in the world, the boy was a spoiled, arrogant brat who would likely go the way of his father. He was still a student and one of his snakes. Severus had always felt the need to look after his Slytherins, since so many other teachers tended to ignore them in favor of the other houses. He would not stand by and allow someone to abuse one of his charges.
"Is that what we think it is?"
Albus asked Charlie, pointing to the gleaming piece of red dragon gold around Draco's neck. "Yes," Charlie said simply, seeming quite pleased with himself. "You coerced a student into accepting—" McGonagall began in outraged Charlie, while not a student any longer was still one of her Gryffindors. But Charlie cut her off, interrupting her words before she could finish the accusation. "You can't coerce someone into accepting dragon gold," he informed her. "The magic doesn't work if it's not consensual." "Impossible," Severus shook his head. "Draco was a Slytherin and a Malfoy. He knows more about dark magic than most people ever learn. He knows how powerful blood magic is. There is no way he would ever willingly exchange blood with another wizard. Actually," Charlie grinned at him, "the ritual specifically calls for an exchange of life fluid. Everyone just assumes it has to be blood." "Well, what else could it possibly refer to?" Minerva exclaimed. "Blood is the most—" She started to a stop as if something else had just occurred to her, her cheeks turning rosy with embarrassment. Severus stared at the young man in shock. Charlie looked far too smug for his words to be taken any other way. "You didn't?" he asked. Charlie just grinned. "I assure you it was completely consensual." Severus moved over to a chair and sank down into it. "His father is going to kill you." "Oh, the name of Merlin, Mr. Weasley!" Minerva exclaimed in outrage. "What on earth would possess you to do something like this?" When she received no answer from the smug young man, she turned toward Dumbledore. "Albus, clearly you don't condone this."
"I'm afraid it's rather out of my hands, Minerva," Dumbledore replied, though he looked rather amused. "What's done is done, and only Charlie can undo it, and I rather think that the blame for this can be placed ultimately at the feet of Lucius Malfoy, unless I miss my guess."
"You were in the room when Lupin went feral," Severus stated, looking at Charlie with understanding in his eyes. He hadn't been aware of the fact that Weasley Boy had any feelings for Draco, but after his own experience, he knew how even the slightest bit of lust could be amplified out of control. Charlie just shrugged. Neither Remus nor Sirius deserved what was happening to them, and neither did Draco. Now all three of them are safe. "Safe!" Minerva protested. "You've stripped the boy of his humanity! How does that make him safe?" "I removed him from the care of Lucius Malfoy," Charlie replied. "His father has no control over him now. I won't let that man use him ever again. He deserves to be free to become the person he is meant to be." "Free?" Minerva exclaimed. "How does enslaving him make him free?" Charlie frowned at that, glaring hard at her. "Professor McGonagall, you've known me nearly my whole life. Have I ever done something that would make you think that I would vindictively harm another person? Do you honestly think I would do anything to ruin that young man's life?" Minerva grew still at that, her eyes flickering to the young man still lying unconscious on the bed. Her disapproving frown lessened somewhat, but did not vanish. "He's a Malfoy. The Weasleys hate the Malfoys." "We hate Lucius Malfoy," Charlie corrected, "and with good cause. Draco is not his father, far from it. Anyone who looked deep enough could see that, though I suspect very few people ever bother. Well, I have, and what I've seen is worth saving." A moan from the bed drew all their attention. Draco was throwing off the stunning charm, waking up. His hand moved to his head briefly, brushing back his blonde hair as his eyes fluttered. Then, remembering what had happened, he sat up suddenly, staring in shock at those gathered around his bed. His eyes narrowed when he spied at Charlie, rage burning in them, though Severus thought he could also see some fair bit of hurt as well. "Yow!" he shouted at Charlie and raised his tightly clenched fists to strike Charlie. Charlie caught hold of his wrists and restrained him easily. "Mr. Malfoy!" Severus snapped, his voice catching the boy's attention immediately. Control yourself! His Slytherins were well trained to obey him, knowing better than to cross him. Draco reined in the fury that made him want to physically strike out, but his anger had not abated. Take this off me at once! He ordered, grabbing the chain that held the red dragon gold. No, dragon, Charlie said simply. Don't call me that! Draco shouted, his eyes flashing. Take this off of me! My father will make you! Charlie's eyes hardened at that. Your father was about to make you marry Sirius Black, a man all but bonded to a werewolf. Do you know what werewolves do to people who come between them and their mate? Draco bailed at his words and looked swiftly towards Severus for confirmation of his words. Severus wasn't certain if Draco knew either the identity of his intended spouse or anything about Black's fondness for Lupin. He nodded to the boy in acknowledgement. Sirius Black? Draco asked in disbelief. It was likely he'd heard many conflicting stories about Black, both the faulty information about his past printed in the paper and whatever pieces of the truth he might have gleaned from his father. Why would he pick Sirius Black? You're lying! He's not lying, Mr. Malfoy, Severus informed him. Your father asked me to present the proposal to Black myself, and Mr. Weasley is quite correct. Lupin would tear you apart if he was allowed to get near you. Lupin! Draco shuddered in horror at the thought. Like most purebloods, he had an intrinsic fear of werewolves. Draco had never been particularly brave, and every manner of prejudice had been beaten into him. Are you telling me that my father set me up? He demanded then, reading the worst possible interpretation into events. Then he tried to kill me? The look of betrayal in the boy's eyes was painful to see. Severus could understand the question. If Lucius did want his son dead, what a rather unique way of going about it. He'd be completely innocent of any crime himself, and could have Lupin destroyed for doing the deed instead. But still, to think such a thing of his own father, to have that be the first thought that filled his head, it did not bode well for the life the boy must have lived up to now.
Actually, Mr. Malfoy, I think this was your father's rather misguided attempt to save you,
Albus informed the bewildered boy, the twinkle in his eyes dimmed now with some sadness. He, too, seemed to find the idea that Draco would believe such a thing tragic, and sought to offer some small comfort. Minerva had looked away entirely, unable to face the look of betrayal.
I believe this is his way of keeping you from other influences that might be detrimental to your health. Regardless of anyone's alliances, no one could doubt that Sirius Black is one of the few people in England of suitable lineage for you.
Draco frowned. Severus knew he was cunning enough to understand that Albus was referring to the Dark Lord. He was also smart enough not to reference it directly, and possibly implicate his father in anything. But Lucius had never been a kind man, and had certainly never been an affectionate man. Severus suspected Draco was having a hard time accepting that his father might have any desire at all to protect him, let alone in such a manner. Instead, Draco shot a glare at Charlie. You tricked me! He accused, and this time they could all see the hurt behind that accusation. Severus found himself squirming uncomfortably at the look in Draco's eyes. Would Harry have looked at him like that, he wondered, if he had not stopped his actions the other night? Charlie's gaze softened. I told you not to worry. Things have a way of working out. He raised his hand to touch them, but Draco turned away from him, shrugging off his hand when it touched his shoulder. The sound at the infirmary door caught their attention, and they saw Hagrid standing there with a pensive look on his face. Headmaster, Lucius Malfoy and Arthur Weasley are here with a group of Aurors, the large man informed him. Goodness, that was fast! Minerva exclaimed. How could they have found out about this so quickly?
Actually, I don't think they are here about Draco, Albus replied with a frown. Show them in here, Hagrid. I'll deal with it.
Yes, sir. Hagrid nodded, looking relieved by Dumbledore's words. This is about Lupin, Severus guessed. Albus nodded.
Arthur sent me word about a search warrant this morning. He was trying to get an injunction against it, but I suspect he failed.
He got the euthanasia order so quickly? Severus asked in shock, thinking about what the news would do to Harry. A part of him hadn't actually believed that Lucius would go through with this. To actually kill Remus so blatantly in order to secure the position he wanted for his son. It had been foolish to even consider any other possibility. Lucius was a viper, always had been, always would be. Albus shook his head.
A seizure for a formal inquiry, he corrected. Euthanasia requires a full vote from the Wizengamot. No doubt Fudge wants to turn this to his advantage.
They're going to euthanize someone? Draco asked in confusion. Yes, Mr. Malfoy, Minerva said tartly, gazing sternly down at the student. They want to euthanize Professor Lupin. At least that is a slightly more humane death than the beheading they had planned for Hagrid's hippogriff in your 3rd year. Draco flushed angrily at the reminder of the role he played in that event. He was a vicious animal, he grumbled. He attacked me. You are not classified as an animal, Mr. Malfoy, Minerva reminded him. The boy bailed. And after your behavior in the Great Hall, I suspect there are many who would happily use the term vicious to describe you as well. The sound at the door caught their attention again, and Severus rose from his chair to stand beside Albus and Minerva as a group of Aurors entered, followed by Lucius and Arthur. Lucius, looking elegant in formal black robes, had a smug expression on his face that reminded Severus of the expression Draco had worn when he'd entered the Great Hall that morning. Draco, surprisingly, stayed utterly silent, making no move off the bed and out from behind the 3 professors standing in front of him. Arthur Weasley, who noticed his son standing in the background, looked tired and harried, his clothing somewhat rumpled. The lead Auror, an older man Severus was not familiar with, handed a scroll to Dumbledore. Master, we have orders to search Hogwarts and take Remus Lupin into custody. I understand he has been staying here as a guest. Dumbledore took the scroll and glanced at it briefly.
Yes, but I'm afraid he's gone at the moment. You are, of course, welcome to search the castle, but I do ask that you take care not to disrupt classes any more than necessary.
A flicker of irritation passed over Lucius's face. Severus suspected he had been counting on Lupin still being present in the castle. Apparently the man had not truly realized just what a violent reaction the werewolf would have had to the proposal, or perhaps he had not counted on Severus informing anyone other than Black about it. I'm sorry, Albus, Arthur broke in. I filed the necessary paperwork to get an injunction, but it keeps getting delayed, mysteriously.
That's quite all right, Arthur,
Albus assured the man.
As I said, Lupin will not be found in this castle, and these things have a way of working themselves out as it is.
Severus had to stifle a smile at that statement. Things had indeed been worked out in a rather unexpected manner, and to think Sirius Black was still oblivious to the chaos that centered around him. The Arthurs took that as their cue to begin their search, nodding politely to those present as they headed out to begin. Lucius, however, stepped forward arrogantly.
Severus, I trust you have taken steps to inform Sirius Black of...
He broke off when he finally spotted Draco sitting on the bed behind the 3 of them.
His eyes narrowed. What is my son doing in the infirmary?
Draco immediately scrambled off the bed, standing up straight as he faced his father.
Hello, Father?
He stuttered. Lucius's lips tightened in displeasure. A Malfoy did not stutter.
Draco,
Lucius drawled in cultured disdain.
What have you...
The man froze, and Severus knew he had spotted the red dragon gold hanging around his son's neck. His hand tightened around his silver-headed staff. Severus shifted slightly, moving his own hands into position to draw his wand quickly if necessary.
What in Salazar's name is that monstrosity hanging around your neck?
Draco lifted one hand to grasp the gold. They could all see that his hand was shaking. The boy had gone as white as a ghost.
It's red dragon gold, Lucius,
Dumbledore said mildly. The reaction from Arthur Weasley was almost comical. His eyes nearly bugged out. But Lucius was not amused. He glanced down at his son, fury burning in his eyes.
You exchanged blood?
He demanded of the terrified student.
Blood?
Draco's voice broke when he spoke. He shook his head furiously.
No, of course not. I would never...
Lucius hissed in rage, his knuckles turning white around his cane. It was obvious that he knew the alternative method of fluid exchange without further explanation. Trust Lucius to know every possible path to enslavement known to man.
You stupid boy!
He shouted. He started to draw the silver snakehead from his cane, revealing the black length of his wand, but instantly there were 5 other wands pointed directly at him. Draco just stood there in shock, unmoving. Lucius stayed his hand, but did not seem intimidated by the wands pointed at him. He glared at Charlie. Charlie's wand did not waver.
You are responsible for this, I assume?
Charlie just nodded. Lucius sneered at Draco, who flinched under the man's scrutiny.
You couldn't wait to spread your legs, could you? He hissed. Mr. Malfoy!
Minerva exclaimed in outrage. Lucius ignored her. "Remove it at once," he ordered Charlie imperiously. But Charlie just shook his head. "No." "Then I demand satisfaction," Lucius insisted, eyes gleaming with a glee Severus was very familiar with. Lucius was one of the most vicious duelers he'd ever seen. Charlie's determination did not waver. "I'm not a child to be frightened, Malfoy," he growled. "I regularly tame dragons. You think I'm afraid of a duel?" But Lucius just sneered at him. "The duel falls to your father." "I'm not afraid of you either, Lucius," Arthur assured him, though Severus seriously doubted the man stood any chance against Lucius.
"Actually, gentlemen,"
Albus interrupted, his eyes twinkling,
"since the Weasley family is publicly allied with the Dumbledores, the duel falls to me. I'd be more than happy to take up your challenge, Lucius, if that is what you wish."
Lucius stiffened at the headmaster's words and turned carefully to look at the man. Like everyone else in the room, save Draco, Dumbledore still had his wand pointed at Lucius's chest. Though the blond man kept his expression in check, Severus knew what thoughts were likely going through the man's head. As a dueler, Albus Dumbledore was undefeated. Even Voldemort himself feared facing him one-on-one. Lucius raised one blond eyebrow. "I take it you condone what has been done to my son?" he sneered at the headmaster.
"You seem to know the ritual in question quite well, Lucius," Dumbledore remarked. "You know it must be consensual to work. Until Draco showed up this morning wearing that gold around his neck, I had no knowledge of the event in question. Are you suggesting I have the ability to control your son? The Imperius is still quite illegal, last I checked."
"He is my son!" Lucius hissed at all of them, his anger barely held in check. Lucius was not known for controlling his temper. "The heir to the Malfoy family. I will not allow him to remain chained like some animal." Severus honestly wasn't certain if Lucius's outrage was true concern for his son or humiliation at what this would do to the Malfoy name. Perhaps it was a bit of both. The man had ultimately wanted to protect Draco, get him away from the Dark Lord's influence.
"Then perhaps, Lucius, you would be better served to find some compromise or agreement with Mr. Weasley rather than demanding duels that might not end well," Dumbledore replied. Lucius's eyes hardened, and he turned to glare at Charlie. A cold, disdainful smile curled one corner of his mouth. "Yes, of course," he spat. "I should have realized. How much do you want?" Charlie frowned in confusion. "What? Money, Weasley," Lucius snapped. "How much money will this take? Dragons sell on the black market for about 20,000 galleons. I trust that will be sufficient." Severus noticed the look of shame that crossed Draco's face as he realized he was about to be bought and sold like an animal. His gasp of shock caught all their attention, and the boy seemed to stumble as if growing faint. Fast as a striking snake, Lucius's hand shot out and grasped Draco by the chin, forcing him to look up. The man's fingers dug into the pale flesh painfully. "You brought this on yourself by your own stupidity," he snarled. "You will not disgrace yourself further by—" Before he could finish, Charlie had pulled Draco out of the man's grasp and shoved the boy behind him, wand still raised. "You will not touch him again, Malfoy!" he yelled in outrage. Lucius's blue eyes flashed in outrage. "I will discipline my son as I see fit." "He's my responsibility now," Charlie informed him. "He's under my protection, and you will not touch him again." "Gentlemen,"
Albus interrupted them both, his voice hard and demanding. There was enough power behind it that even Lucius turned.
"Fighting amongst ourselves is not going to settle this matter."
"Well, I do not want his gold," Charlie stated flatly. Lucius ground his teeth together in frustration. "You want more than I offered? Name your price." "This isn't about galleons, Malfoy!" Charlie exclaimed in disgust. "Not everyone cares about money. And may I remind you that an excessive fondness for gold is what caused all this to begin with. You've taught Draco very well." Severus saw Draco flinch at those words, and he had the suspicion that they were not entirely true. The hurt he had seen in his eyes spoke more of an interest in Charlie than in the gold around his neck. The boy's humiliation seemed complete. Lucius was fighting to control his temper. "What will it take to get you to remove that monstrosity around his neck?" he bit out. Charlie frowned, glancing briefly over at his father, who frankly seemed at a loss for words by this exchange. "Marriage," said Charlie simply. "I will remove the gold the day he is married to me." Draco looked up at Charlie in shock, looking more bewildered by the moment. Lucius just turned his back and stepped away, his fist tightening and relaxing over and over again on his cane. Truthfully, Severus was not surprised at Charlie's request. After all, it was the feral possessiveness and lust that had sparked this chain of events. But the reality was he did not need to offer this concession. Draco was his legally already. There was nothing Lucius or any of them could do about this, and Lucius knew it. In truth, the offer was extremely generous. Arthur was watching his son intently, eyes narrowed. "I see," Lucius murmured, and Severus saw something hard and dark gleaming in the man's eyes. He glanced at Dumbledore uneasily, hoping the man would say something to Charlie, warn him of the danger this offer posed. Draco held the superior position in society. Once Draco was married and freed of the dragon gold, Charlie would be at the mercy of the Malfoy family. Severus noticed the wary look in Draco's eyes, and he looked like he was about to speak up. It spoke volumes of his feelings for Charlie if he was willing to warn him against the very action that would free him. Severus honestly hadn't thought the boy capable of such feelings. Perhaps Charlie was right. No one had looked deep enough. A sharp glare from his father, however, instantly silenced any words Draco might say. The boy paled nervously and glanced at Severus as if seeking some aid. "And you will sign a marriage contract agreeing to remove the gold?" Lucius asked, turning once more to look at Charlie, his face expressionless. Charlie smiled at him, and if the man had not been a Gryffindor, Severus would have sworn it looked cunning. "I will agree to remove the gold in a matrimonium sedo contract." Severus's eyes widened, his expression mirrored by Lucius. Unlike his marriage to Harry, where they were essentially equals despite the monetary inequities, this would be far different. A marriage in sedo would put Draco in the position of submission despite his name, his money, or his standing in society. Rather than Charlie becoming a member of the Malfoy family, Draco would become a Weasley. Charlie would make all the decisions about where they would live, who they would associate with, how they would spend their money. It would remove any control Lucius would have over the couple. Not until Lucius was dead and Draco inherited the Malfoy title would they resume the position of equals. Even their children would bear the Weasley name. Charlie, it seemed, had thought this out quite carefully. His claim to Ron earlier that he had ended the feud between their families had been justified. "Absolutely not!" Lucius roared. "Then the gold stays where it is." Charlie shrugged. "This is madness," Lucius snarled. "It would be the end of the Malfoy name." "I'll agree to a hyphenated name," Charlie conceded. "Malfoy Weasley." "No!" Lucius turned toward Dumbledore. "This is impossible, unacceptable."
"It seems like a generous offer to me, Lucius," Dumbledore informed him. "He does not have to agree to anything. You have no legal recourse at all." Lucius turned then to Arthur, glaring at the man in utter hatred. "Talk to your son," he ordered. "You must have some sense of propriety left within you. Tell him how shameful this is. You are head of house. Order him to see reason." An odd expression crossed Arthur's face, and he nodded. "Of course, Lucius," he agreed mildly, and then turned toward Charlie. "Charlie?" "Yes, Dad?" "As head of the Weasley household, I must tell you that if you don't stick to your convictions and do exactly what your heart tells you to do, I will never speak to you again." Arthur smiled at his son. Charlie inclined his head in amusement. "Understood?" Lucius stared incredulous between the two of them, fury in every line of his body. But like everyone else in the room, the man understood that he had no choice in this matter. He could not allow his heir to remain chained like an animal. The shame of that far exceeded any marriage, sedo or otherwise. "Fine!" Lucius spat out, unable to do anything else. "Wait!" Charlie insisted, and the man's eyes flashed in outrage. "This is Draco's decision. He's the one who must agree to it, not you." They all looked to Draco, Lucius's expression one of irritation. Draco, who'd sank back down onto the edge of the bed, looked up in surprise. No doubt he had been asked rarely to make such a decision for himself. His father had controlled his every move up until now. He seemed utterly at a loss for what to do. He looked to each person in the room as if seeking an answer in their faces. He flinched away from his father's glare and flushed under Charlie's intense stare. But finally he nodded his head in uncertain agreement, his fist clutching tightly to the dragon gold around his neck.
Though he had known the boy his entire life, Severus could not even guess at what he might be feeling. "I'll have my lawyers draw up the contract," Lucius said coldly, making one last bid for some control over the situation.
"Oh, don't be silly, Lucius," Dumbledore replied, his eyes twinkling once more in delight. No doubt he'd enjoyed how this all played out. "I'll draw up the contract for the Weasleys, as is my duty. Now, I do believe we have other business, Aurors roaming around the school looking for someone they will not find. Come, Lucius, I'll escort you out. Charlie, perhaps you would be so good as to see that young Draco makes it to his first class? Charms, I believe."
"Of course, Headmaster." Charlie nodded in agreement. At Dumbledore's insistence, they all left the infirmary, leaving Charlie and Draco alone. It was obvious that Lucius wanted a few private words with his son, but no one was going to allow that. But rather than wait for the Aurors and their news of Remus Lupin, Lucius took his leave of all of them and left the castle in a huff. No doubt he was heading home to figure out how he could salvage the mess his son had made of things. Severus couldn't help but wonder how he would explain this to the Dark Lord. Lucius usually landed on his feet, but this would take some major dancing this time around. He didn't envy the man the experience.